Hello and welcome to the second part of our sponsorship webinar with Jamie Macken from Core Sponsorship. In the first part of this session, we covered some of the way in which advertising theory has been translated over to create a real set of a framework, a set of boundaries against which sponsorship can be measured, judged, and created in as good a possible way as we can. Today, we're looking into how that theoretical side of it has actually come forward and can be applied in terms of more strategic thinking. We're going to have a look at a couple of really good examples of that. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to our host for this afternoon, or for this session, Jamie Macken from Core. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much. Great to be here. I hope everyone's safe and well at home. Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Jamie Macken. I'm the Deputy Managing Director of Core Sponsorship. And Core Sponsorship is part of Core, which is Ireland's largest marketing and communications company. Don't worry, this slide isn't a hard sell, just a quick recap for those who didn't see it in part one of this webinar. Core Sponsorship is one of 9 practices in Core. We're very lucky in Core Sponsorship to be able to work with our colleagues in the likes of research and creative and data and so on, to help us provide really compelling solutions in the market. And I really want to call out, given the strange times we're living in, I'd love to call out my colleagues who are working with clients such as the HSE and doing amazing research, amazing creative, media planning at the moment during these really crazy times. It's really proud to work in Core. Recently, we published this report, which Rob has very kindly put up on Sport for Business, COVID-19 Sponsorship Impact Report. We interviewed a number of rights holders and brands, and there's 6 emerging themes you can see on this slide. I'm not going to talk about it at all today. I just want to reference that this course and this webinar is designed in a kind of a COVID-free world, if there is such a thing. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever live in a COVID-free world, in the sense that the impact of this is going to be felt for a very long time. But today we're going to kind of crack ahead as if it's not happening anyway, at the very least. But please, by all means, if you haven't read this report, go to Rob's Sport for Business site and download it and have a look. It should be an interesting read. So today I'm going to cover 2 parts. The first is defining objectives, and it's exactly that. It's about how you set out your stall and how you prepare and what you need to know before you can even embark on creating a sponsorship strategy. And then the second section is exactly that, is the developing of a sponsorship strategy. What are the building blocks that we must put in place in order to create something that's effective and is going to endure? And that's the bulk of today's presentation, the second part. This image is just something that we'll come back to later on. If you're ever looking to find an image of a lumberjack on Google, it's quite hard, so you can end up with something as bad as this, but I'll come back to it later, and hopefully it'll have some relevance when I do. So a crack ahead. Step 1 is defining objectives, and the first thing I want to do is ask everyone at home a question, and that is, which objectives can sponsorship address? And indeed, it's a bit of a farcical question, because there's no end to what sponsorship can do. It's a very multifaceted tool. It can help to drive brand consideration and help enhance brand image, challenge perceptions of your brand, can help with customer and staff retention and acquisition, driving NPS, advocacy, and so on and so on and so on. It's a very dynamic tool that can be used for external communications, but also for internal communications as well. So taking that thinking, and looking at this example, which is legal sponsorship of the Ladies Gaelic Football Association, sponsorship that we're all very familiar with. I'd love to claim some role on this, but I can't claim any. I've ever worked in it, so well done to everyone who has, because it's such good work. But I think we can all safely assume, if I was to ask you what you think the business and marketing objectives might have been for legal at the time, I think we can assume community would have been in there, around driving strong communicative credentials, enhancing trust in the community, and creating social capital for the brand, in this case around female sport, getting behind something and really helping to make a difference. And by doing so, the sponsor is able to create goodwill, and goodwill translates into commercial effects. So goodwill is goodwill from fans, driving things like brand affinity and consideration and so on. I think in this case, Lidl, I'm sure, also found the sponsor to be very relevant for helping with employee engagement and employee retention and so on. I'm going to refer to an unpost case study throughout today, so it'll be threaded through the course or the presentation. And the first way I want to use it is to talk about defining business challenges and marketing objectives. So in 2016-17, or possibly actually straying into 2018, Post went through a complete brand review, the results of which we see everywhere today with the new brand architecture and look and feel and so on. But at the time, back in 2018. On this slide here, you can see some of the challenges that came out off the back of that review. So for example, Unpust's brand perception lagged behind its modern offering. It was seen as staid and tired, somewhat old. It had become the most visible yet invisible brand. So we saw the brand everywhere and every touch point, from retail to vehicles to post stamps, etc. But what had it become to mean? What did it mean for a younger audience in particular? It had lost relevance, especially to a younger audience. I think we can even say utility in some ways. And it had become increasingly fragmented across money offers and packaging and parcels, etc. So many offerings to the brand have been quite diluted. So when faced with all these business challenges, we would have looked at this and we would have deduced like a very top line marketing objective. And that was to shift brand perception and improve affinity amongst under 35s. So taking those challenges and that marketing objective, do you think there was a role that sponsorship could play to help provide a solution? Well, before we can ask that question, it's important to remember what sponsorship is not. So sponsorship is not about driving brand awareness. And in this case, well, that's good news, because Unpust, as we already know, was the most visible and most invisible brand. I mean, everyone knows the Unpust brand, but what did it stand for? The challenge we had was demonstrating relevance and utility. So we can tick that box, sponsorship could help. The second one is it's certainly not about short term in this case. This is not a new product or a new service offering, but a new brand ID, a new promise, a new perception. So much more long-term challenges. So again, we can tick that box. Sponsorship certainly can help there. And it wasn't about replacing ads. We got a whole new brand push. So there was going to be a lot of advertising, a lot of touch points, a lot of channels and mix, etc. So again, sponsorship can certainly help. So in this case, if we can do it as crudely as that in one slide, we came to a point of, yes, sponsorship certainly could help. It could provide a solution. But what property? So with the understanding that sponsorship can help Unpust to achieve its business and marketing goals and objectives, how do we go about finding a sponsor? Well, the first thing you have to factor in when thinking about that question is, well, what do we consider? How do we even go looking for a potential property? Well, you must factor in many things. Depending on the type of business or the industry, the business challenge, etc., there are many things to factor. And this is also very important for rights holders to consider. It's important for rights holders to understand all the factors that a sponsor might be considering when going to market looking for a property, because that then helps the rights holder to better position, prospect, and prepare for sponsor advances. So in this case, we were looking very closely at the audience profile of a potential sponsor. We were thinking of the resource capability. Did we want to work with someone who didn't have the resources to leverage the sponsorship to the degree that Unpust would want to leverage it, for example? What sort of digital and data capabilities did they have? What was the timings? Very, very important. If you work in a business or a brand that is very visible at the beginning of the year, do you really want to work with a sponsorship at the same time, or would a sponsorship that's visible at the end of the year be more valuable? I don't know. So these things must be factored. And what tools do you use to help factor those things? Again, there are many, and there's no silver bullet to this, but there's nothing like getting out there, getting straight on the feet and meeting people, be it quant research or qual research, delving into social media analysis, looking at case studies and so on. When we did the Unpust example, going back to that case study that I'm going to refer to throughout today, we did our due diligence and we learned the following. We learned that our target audience felt overconnected and that they were close to burnout. Almost 60% of them felt that they used their phones too much. And we found out that almost three quarters of them wanted to read more, but that 2/3 of them felt that the lack of free time was preventing them from doing so. And at the same time, in our secondary research, desk research, we learned that unlike vinyl, books were making a comeback at the same time where e-readers and Kindles were a slight decline in sales. Physical book sales were on the up, particularly with younger cohorts as well. And we saw examples of rich content around reading and books. And of course, we knew that the Unpust brand's heritage was deeply rooted in the written word and in literacy programs. So more people reading and writing is fundamental to the Unpust brand. Well, this led us to challenge perceptions by doing what no one expected, and that was to sponsor a book awards. So at the same time, we also knew from the National Sponsorship Index, which is our tool on core sponsorship, we knew that sponsors of smaller and more niche properties index higher with regards to goodwill, and goodwill generates commercial effect. So that was a very important insight for us when arriving at the property of the Irish Book Awards. So in sum, rigorous analysis pointed to the Book Awards as the ideal fit for Unpust to shift brand perception and improve affinity for under 35s. But we weren't quite there yet because there were some other important ingredients that you must factor before you're sure that the property is right for you. And key to that is chemistry. In 2015, we did some research called the People Factor, where we met with and spoke with 20 rights holders and 20 sponsors to understand what fuels and what underpins the best sponsorships in Ireland. And we learned these 4 things were pivotal. First, personal relationships matter. You have to want to do business with the person on the other side of the table, more so in sponsorship than in any form of business, because we know how ingrained it becomes into your business. In order for that to work, you have to have respect, and respect must be mutual on both sides. There must be a clear understanding of the levels of resource that can be put to the sponsorship. Too often, rights holders maybe overpromise the amount of capacity they have to service a sponsor. It's really important not to do that. Likewise, sponsors may go in with plenty of ideas, but slowly run out of capacity to deliver on them. And lack of clarity was a big thing on both sides, not keeping each other abreast of changes in your brand or in the rights in the organization that you're running. These things are very, very important for instilling the trust that is integral to successful sponsorships. And just some examples of the quotes that came out of that research that we did. I've highlighted 3. On the top left, don't squeeze too much out of the contract. You never come back from a bad start. Or on the bottom left, the best sponsors ask you, what is your vision for growth? On the right, when everyone has skin in the game, everyone wants to make it work. And when the ingredients are there, it leads to this, what we call our circle of trust, to steal from Meet the Parents or Meet the Fockers. I can't remember which movie it was. But this wheel is a really sort of distilled example of how the relationship should work, and when it works, why it works. So at the top, clarity. So we touched on this. Clarity on both sides with regards to what you're trying to achieve in the sponsorship, setting mutually beneficial goals and a vision. When you do that, you get respect from the sponsor and respect for the rights holder. And of course, respect leads to trust. And trust is critical for flexibility. And we all know in sponsorship, you need flexibility to make sponsorship work really, really well. You don't want to be governed only by the letter of the contract. When you get flexibility, you go over and above, and you get follow through. And that leads to even more trust, stronger relationships, which leads to success, and ultimately, all going well, to renewals. So that's just an example of how that wheel can work. And the last part, when you're looking at a property and to make sure that this is going to work brilliantly for everybody, and that is to ensure that you have the trust and the respect and the clarity we've talked about. You must be clear about the total investment required to make it work. So can anyone guess what the 4th box is if you're thinking at home? So the top box, we have property fee. That's straightforward enough. The fee to the rights that you're buying or selling. The activation costs, so that's to execute and activate and leverage the sponsorship. The measurement costs, often forgotten, but very, very important to understand the impact and the commercial effect of the sponsor. And last but not least, the time and resource. So that capacity piece we spoke about earlier. So you understand your business objectives, your marketing objectives. You've done thorough analysis and you've come across a property that you know is a right fit. The chemistry's there and you believe you're going to be able to work with somebody in order to develop a relationship that's going to lead to commercial success from a sponsor's point of view. So how do we go about developing a strategy? Well, the first question I'm going to ask is, what makes a good strategy? And well, there's many answers to it, but there's one that sits above all, and that is clarity of purpose. And in particular, clarity of purpose with 3 things. Firstly, clarity with regards to the business need that we've touched on a moment ago. You have to understand what your business challenge is before you even entertain the idea of trying to develop a strategy. Secondly, clarity with regards to the role for sponsorship. So understanding what sponsorship can and cannot do. And really important to understand what sponsorship cannot do. It's not the be all and end all. It can't provide solutions to all challenges, we know. And thirdly, clarity with regards to the rights and the assets of the sponsor. So the types of image rights that you may or may not have, how you access talent or how you can't access talent and so on. Really important to understand and have clarity across those 3 areas. And you must also have an absolutely deep and thorough understanding of your own business or your client's business, their supply chain, their products, their services, their customers. And of course, a deep understanding of your competition and their industry and their sponsorships. And last but not least, a deep understanding of the consumer and the fans. So clarity of purpose and a deep understanding of your business, your competitor's business, and the consumer. That is the foundation point before you can embark on actually developing a strategy. And the map or the barometer are going to chart the course for you when you go about setting your strategy are KPIs. Now, we're all familiar with KPIs. And sometimes they're bolt-on, and sometimes they're things that we are judged on too critically. But KPIs can be flexible, but most importantly, KPIs act as a guide to develop strategy, to help with the insight development, to help with the ideation, to help with the creativity, to help with planning of the channel mix, and of course, to help with the activation itself. And last but not least, to run the rule and to see how commercially effective the sponsorship was in the first place, making sure it was set up to achieve the business challenges that we started with. And again, as you've probably looked at already, there's an example of the smart KPIs that we set when developing the Unpost Book Awards, all related back to our business challenge, which was around driving affinity and consideration and challenging brand perception for under 35s. And what we're all striving for in sponsorship is that golden word, and that is legitimacy. So your strategy must cement your legitimacy to be there, your legitimacy to engage with fans and to become part of the Holy Trinity. And in this case, that is the property, the sponsor and the fan. To be part of that mix, you have to have legitimacy, and the best sponsorships help you to build that legitimacy. So how do we go about doing that? Well, it's these 4 things. And these are the 4 essential building blocks we're going to delve into in more detail now. Firstly, authenticity. Yes, of course, sponsorship is a commercial relationship. Otherwise, there'd be no point in doing it. There has to be a commercial uplift for the sponsor. But it's different to advertising, obviously, and other commercial relationships, in that you must respect those people that matter most. In this case, it's always the fans. Players, other stakeholders, of course, but always fans. So if there's no authenticity, you're off to a bad start. And what do we mean by authenticity? Well, you might recall from part 1 of this webinar, I touched on this book, which is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And we talked about how sponsorship provides a great platform for brands to shine a light on their why, on their brand values. Understanding your why and being committed to fans in the face of adversity, for example, can help to create social capital and goodwill that helps to enhance your brand image. And I think that's no more relevant than today in the face of COVID-19. And one of the early examples of a brand doing well was the Wasps rugby brand in the UK. They immediately created a campaign called Make That Call, where they had players engaging and calling vulnerable members of the community, helping to send out food. And of course, there's been many other examples across the world of brands, sponsors, and rights holders doing great things in the face of COVID. And all of that helps to create legitimacy. And when you do, you get that win-win-win relationship, which means that you have credibility to be there. And that is the foundation point of brilliant sponsorship strategies, and allows to be a springboard into commercial results and so on. So we're going to talk now about insight, which is obviously integral and critical to success of any sponsorship strategy. And while authenticity is the key to starting the process, the insight is going to be the foundation and the root that helps you to sustain and endure a campaign for a longer term. So why does insight matter? Well, in sponsorship, playing with passion is akin to playing with fire. You must be very, very careful, and there might be no coming back from getting it wrong. I'm going to show an example now, and it's not the most strategic example of an insight going wrong. It doesn't relate to a big strategic sponsorship platform or campaign, but it does get the message across. And there's an example of something going wrong in an activation. So in 2015, Park Thistle, Scottish soccer club, football club, announced a new sponsorship with Kingsford Capital Management, an investment advisory firm from the United States. The relationship came about off a chance meeting between the sponsor and an artist called David Shergley, who happened to be a Turner Prize winning artist. And he created this mascot called Kingsley. And you can probably see where this is going. The reaction wasn't great. So that's terrifying, or I think I need therapy after seeing this. Or on the right, my favorite, which is the Hibs mascot reaction, which is just a good example of social reactive advertising and communication. But it gets better. I think this probably pretty accurate depiction of what it looked like. But my personal favorite is definitely Lisa Simpson on crystal meth. So suffice it to say, insight helps you to become part of the story, not the story. Sponsors need to avoid that at all costs. And having an insight that is rooted in a human truth, in a fan truth, helps to mitigate the risk. And ultimately what we're after is an insight that is deeply related to the property, to the sponsor, and to the fans. So how do we go about doing that? How do you find an insight that's bulletproof? How do you find an insight that's unshakable, that's going to allow your campaign and sponsorship strategy to endure? Well, tools that can be used, there is no silver bullet. A bit like looking for a property I mentioned earlier, there's many ways. Ultimately, it's about sourcing relevant information. It's about establishing hunches and themes, and it's about testing those hunches and themes and hypotheses against the business need, the objectives, the marketing challenges, and so on. It's about uncovering a shared truth for the sponsor, for the property, and the fans. And I'm going to talk about or touch on an architecture now for helping you to develop an insight. And it comes from the Unpost Book Awards case study that I've been referencing today. This is a slide which we would have worked with the creative agency Ringers to help us develop the Unpost campaign. And you can see a Venn diagram. On the right, we have the Unpost truth. And the Unpost truth for us was very straightforward. More Irish people reading and writing is fundamental to our brand. So once we have that, we quickly determine, well, what's the truth of the property that we're sponsoring? Well, the truth here for the Irish Book Awards is that they're here to ensure books stay relevant, to celebrate and promote Irish writing to the widest range of readers possible. So our shared truth, we both want to put more books in more Irish hands. And we believe by doing that Unpost would, if it was to keep literature and books relevant, Unpost would also help to keep itself relevant. And that wasn't just a woolly statement that we created out of nowhere. We'd done our due diligence. You saw the research I mentioned earlier. We knew that a younger cohort of people wanted to read more, but that they were time poor and busy. So we were building this shared truth on robust research and robust understanding. At that point, we're able to get much closer to developing the insight. And ultimately what we're looking for here is an insight that our shared truth can help to answer. So again, on our right-hand side here, our shared truth, we both want to put more books in more Irish hands. And our cultural truth or insight, we all aspire to read more, but life gets in the way. So this ultimately is our timeless insight here, that people always aspire to read more books. And with this insight, we realized that we could impact culture, that we could tap into communities across the country and to connect the brand to a younger demographic with the creative platform readers wanted. So with clarity of purpose as to what we were trying to achieve, that leads to a good insight. And when you have a good insight that's unshakable and that you can trust, it allows for better creative ideation. And greater and better creative ideation leads to creative platforms and sponsorship strategies that will endure and that can be multifaceted. So in this example here of the Unpost Book Awards, our Readers Wanted campaign is going into its third year. Not only has it involved an above-the-line execution across out-of-home and TV, it's also allowed for events, for partnerships, for PR, for social, for reading programs such as NALA and so on. It's very, very, very diverse and it stood the test of time. But also very, very importantly, it's been embraced by the book industry and it's won many awards. So we're very confident that the insight is robust and therefore we can continue to evolve and build the campaign off the back of that. And I'm going to give another example now of an insight that has proven itself over and over again. And it's from the world of sport and you'll all be very familiar with it now.
How are you on? How are you doing?
The Gooch, you read the Gooch, are you?
That's me.
That's it, I see. And would you be professional then, like?
Well, with Kerry you would.
Right. The rest of the country isn't just in Kerry, is it?
No, well, when you're paying for your county, you are pretty much professional. Right?
Why are you up in Dublin now?
To spread the word through commercial that this is the AIB Club Championship.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, the All-Ireland Club Championship.
Yeah, that's the one.
Jeez, we don't hear about it at all, do we?
Yeah, it probably doesn't get the recognition.
Probably doesn't deserve it though, does it?
It's a tough competition to win.
But sure.
So that's the gold right there, when the main protagonist, the man himself, says that it's a tough competition to win, and your insight is exactly that, the toughest, that the club championships is so hard to win and that it's really important to players. You know you're onto something. You know that your insight and the firm ground that you're going to develop your strategy on is solid and it's going to lead to good things. And in this case, as we all know, the AIB Club Championships sponsorship activation has done just that. It's had many touch points, but it's evolved over time and endured into things such as the Toughest Trade TV program, which is run for 3 years on RTE and TV3 or Virgin Media now, and the Toughest Rivalry and so on. But probably the best litmus test has to be proof that the insight is so bang on is that fans immediately and continue to use the toughest in their GA vernacular. And we're all aware of that. It's also been heralded, this sponsorship, by AIB as being one of the Trojan horse really for helping the brand put itself back up after the financial crisis. And some research that was done in 2017 showed that almost 80% of AIB customers agreed that AIB was supporting local community through this sponsorship alone. So a really good example of a sponsorship making a difference. So the third part, we've talked about authenticity and making sure that you're there for the right reasons and understanding your why and position in sponsorship. We've talked about the all-important insight, which is key. And now we're talking about creativity. So how do you bring that insight and how do you activate that insight with creativity, and why is that important? Well, we know that lots and sometimes millions of passionate people are at their most engaged when they're watching a match or at a gig, or whatever the case may be. But it's a creativity that's going to unlock that potential. And why does that matter? Well, you might remember from the last webinar, I touched on this book, which is Marketing in the Era of Accountability by Les Bennett and Peter Fields. And just a quick recap, we talked about how emotionally based campaigns outperform rationally based campaigns on every business measure. And we know that emotion is inherent in sponsorship. So when you mix emotion and creativity, you get a very potent mix. And this potent mix helps to form those durable memories of brands in our minds. Again, we spoke at before, and we know how important that is for enhancing things like mental availability and driving commercial effect. But the correlation between creativity and commercial success, and there's two really good proof points I want to talk about now that really shows that correlation very, very well. The first is from a book, The Case for Creativity by James Herman. I'm going to read directly from it here. The Cannes Advertiser of the Year from 1999 to 2015 outperformed the S&P 500 by a factor of 3.5. And data from Nielsen, more recently, which analysed 500 FMCG campaigns from 2016 and 2017, shows creative is responsible for almost 50% sales uplift compared to reach, brand, and targeting. And another proof point, and this is taken from analysis of the IPA data bank and the Gun Report work, and this is 16 years of campaigns examined, showed that creatively awarded campaigns were 7 times more efficient than non-awarded ones in terms of the level of market share growth they drive per point of ESOV. And ESOV in this means share of voice minus share of market. So 2 very strong proof points as to why creativity matters and how it correlates directly to commercial effect. Another example of that more recently is the Nike Dream Crazy campaign, where Nike not only understood its reason for being there and having complete authenticity, it wanted to breathe life into its Just Do It campaign, which if you ever talk about an enduring platform, that's one. It wanted to breathe new life into it and bring more relevance back to Just Do It. It had a brilliant asset in Colin Kaepernick, who they took a relatively bold decision to sponsor because he wasn't just a first pick on the team, let alone being a controversial figure, but they knew about being on the right side of history. So not only was it a bold and smart sponsorship and campaign, it was also brilliantly creative. And just before I show the video, just give you some results from this. By the September 2018, it was reported that Nike's market value had risen $6 billion since the start of the campaign. Shares were up over 36% in the year, 5% just before this ad, this ad I'm going to show you was launched. And by December of that year, Nike had posted its 3rd straight quarter of growth, which was remarkable because it had just come off a year where it hadn't been doing so well at all. So I'll quickly show the video. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but if not, sit back and enjoy.
Because what non-believers fail to understand is that calling a dream crazy is not an insult. It's a compliment. Don't try to be the fastest runner in your school or the fastest in the world. Be the fastest ever. Don't picture yourself wearing OBJ's jersey. Picture OBJ wearing yours. Don't settle for homecoming queen or linebacker. Do both. Lose 120 pounds and become an Ironman after beating a brain tumor. Don't believe you have to be like anybody to be somebody. If you're born a refugee, don't let it stop you from playing soccer for the national team at age 16. Don't become the best basketball player on the planet. Be bigger than basketball. Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. When they talk about the greatest team in the history of the sport, make sure it's your team. If you have only one hand, don't just watch football, play it at the highest level. And if you're a girl from Compton, don't just become a tennis player. Become the greatest athlete ever. Yeah, that's more like it. So don't ask if your dreams are crazy. Ask if they're crazy enough.
So I've already touched on the commercial results behind that. That campaign scooped a number of awards at the Cannes Advertising Festival last year, picking up Grand Prix and also the inaugural Sport Entertainment for Sport Lion. So obviously the industry also saw it as a hugely creative piece of work. Closer to home, Vodafone, I think, are a great example. Their sponsorship of the Irish rugby team was immensely creative. And one of the first things they did when they came on as sponsor was to do a behind-the-scenes documentary of the team's tour of South Africa. It was a really creative idea. It was brilliantly brought to life. And not only did it win over hardcore fans, but it also broadened the reach of the sponsorship immediately because it was broadcast on linear TV, in this case, RTE. The campaign was really smart for many reasons, but they obviously understood the insatiable demand that people had for behind the scenes content for the Irish rugby team. Personally, in core sponsorship, we knew that ourselves from work we had done in 2015. We saw huge demand for the videos that the players were posting from their training and so on. But what they did was they took that behind the scenes look and feel that we've become so accustomed to on that kind of social media content and brought it above the line. And they did away with the convention of static, piece to camera shots and did above the line executions such as this. So really creative campaign that's evolved and endured over a number of years now and picked up a number of awards and has been very effective. You might recall as we've spoken about the importance of legitimacy. Well, we've looked at insight and authenticity and creativity for helping you to get there. But sometimes people forget the importance of the channel mix. So how and where you target fans has a significant impact on your legitimacy and your relevance. So just an example of, I think, of where that's really gotten right was this example from AIB. AIB's Jeff and Cammie's road trip around Ireland and their journey to Croker. And you think of another sponsor coming into the GAA for the first time, taking two sort of iconic English soccer pundits and putting them into the GAA setting. Might not have gone down so well, but AIB had built up such credibility, legitimacy and authenticity to be in the GAA space that there was never going to be an issue there. It was celebrated and really enjoyed, and the results are outstanding, really. They booked what you would typically do with something like this. They didn't go to TV, they didn't go to a media partner. They did it all themselves on YouTube, on their own channels. And the campaign achieved over 10 million views. Every episode trended #1 on YouTube. And the engagement rate was 4.5 times higher than the industry standard. So, and all of this happening on the bank's own channels, which is really remarkable because we don't tend to go to banks' AIB or banks' YouTube channels too often. And just to bring it back to the Unpost example that I've used today, and I want to just this slide is really to kind of get across the level of analysis that we would do in order to find the media insights to allow us to determine the channel mix to activate a sponsorship. So I'll read a little bit from the slide, but the bullseye target we knew was busy women, aged 25 to 44. And we knew they had really high smartphone penetration and that they used social media a lot, at least once a day. So that led us to understand that the best performing out of home was going to be urban. It was going to be commuter. So when they're busy and traveling to and from work, etc., that had penetration of about 30%. And we also knew that influencers was going to be an important tactic for us here as well. And it allowed us to develop a strategy then for our comms, and that was around targeting moments when people could lose themselves in books, and also how we could create an impactful media style and creative style that would be quick and effective. So that sort of thinking, that sort of analysis leads into then a channel mix planning. And as you might sort of see, and this is not an exhaustive list, but informed then how we went about using Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or out of home, how we went about picking a media partner, how we were leveraged our events even and PR and so on. That kind of upfront analysis is really, really important. And to do that, you need all the ingredients we've talked about before. You have to understand your business need, your marketing objective. You have to have your KPIs. You have to understand the insight and the creative idea, etc. And only then can you go about planning the channel the activation channel mix properly and effectively. I'm just going to touch on a little video that highlights how broad the channel mix was for the Unpost Irish Book Awards example.
Get carried away by the best books of the year with Unpost, sponsors of the Irish Book Awards. Discover the best books to get lost in with Unpost, sponsors of the Irish Book Awards.
So a sense, sort of an overall sense of how broad and diverse and multifaceted that sponsorship has been for us, and the sort of detail went into for planning the channel mix as such. So we're back to our lumberjack and our terrible image, and the reason why I chose this is to use a much hackneyed quote, and that is, if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 sharpening my axe. And I think it's very relevant to what it requires to plan a sponsorship strategy. It's all about the planning. It's all about the insight development and making sure that you have an unshakable insight, that you can build an enduring creative idea and platform from which to activate your sponsorship. But it all starts with your business need, understanding what your business need is, and having a partner who are willing to go on the journey with you. So having that clarity and that mutual respect in the relationship, the sponsor and the rights holder. That's all the ingredients. There's a lot to consider. There's a lot that has to go right. But when it does, when it's planned with diligence and with care, and there's complete clarity of purpose, you can have real impact, really commercially impactful sponsorships. So that's all from me. I'm just going to quickly refer to some of the books I spoke about. I spoke about the report up front that we published, which is the COVID-19 Sponsorship Impact Report, which Rob has kindly put on his site. I referenced The Case for Creativity, which is a book that I picked up in the 2016 Cannes Festival. Great book, highly recommended. And then 2 other pieces of work around the Gun Report IPA study and a war piece by Tony Meehan and ourselves. So I hope that was of use. I hope there's some nuggets in there for rights holders and for sponsors and other people working in our great industry. And that's all. Thank you very much.
That's great, Jamie. Listen, thanks very much for taking the time over these 2 sessions to really give us some good insight and some deep thinking about the way that sponsorship actually works. Just a couple of things picking up off of it that spring to mind. You mentioned the importance of authenticity, and yes, we live in a world where sponsorship assets and tournaments and teams might be looking to transfer from one brand to another. How difficult is it, and how much thought needs to go into actually sort of landing with an authentic message when you could be coming into a tournament or a team or an event that has had a previous long-standing relationship?
Well, is the question about how can you differentiate from the previous sponsor?
Yeah, how can you be authentic? How can you make yourself an integral part of a property that has previously been an integral part of somebody else's property?
Yeah. Well, I think the key word there, is authenticity. You can't make authenticity. You have to be authentic. You can make the insight and you can make the strategy, but the authentic reason for being there is inherent in the type of brand you are and the relationship that you want to have with a sponsor. So if you're coming into a relationship where there's been an excellent sponsorship there in the past, the first thing I would suggest doing is acknowledging how good a relationship and how good a role that sponsorship played. I think, go back to Unpost Book Awards again. Unpost were really complimentary about Bord Gáis and the great work that they had done as a previous sponsor of the Book Awards. And I think that kind of respect and that passing on the baton wins fans over. The next part, though, which is very challenging, is to go about that journey of building the insight, getting the creative right, getting the channel mix right. All of those pieces of the puzzle help to enhance your credibility and therefore your legitimacy for being there. And then, of course, we all want to be better than the last sponsor. So that's where you go about it. You invest time and resource, you invest in the right people, and you invest in the ideas to get there.
Great. One of the point really coming off it, and I know, core sponsorship is part of the wider core family. So you're kind of firmly rooted in a world of advertising and research and insight, and all under the same roof, so to speak. Sponsorship as part of the overall marketing mix, do you think, is it at a point now where it is ready to expand in terms of importance and in terms of share of voice? Like we clearly saw through the presentation today and previously how, a great sponsorship becomes so through that great creativity, that great mix of advertising and mix of messaging that goes into it, way beyond just the sticking of a name onto a shirt. Has sponsorship grown up now to the point where it is genuinely a big player within the overall marketing mix?
I mean, absolutely. I think the Vodafone example of the rugby team, sponsorship for a period of the year becomes front and center of that brand. Guinness do the same, Heineken do the same, Superbly 3. I mean, there's brands that understand sponsorship and how potent it can be. They are understanding and respectful of sponsorship, so much so to put it at the front of their brand for campaigns. But beyond marketing communications, I think sponsorship has a really important role to play across businesses, operational, human resource, CSR functions. So Darkness and Delight, again, much referenced case study, that works brilliantly from a marketing communications point of view, but it also works brilliantly from an internal communications and a staff motivation point of view. I think if you look at, say, the Grant Thornton 5K challenge, that's a lot of that's outwardly, but also inwardly facing. So it's sponsorship's time is not now, it's been around for a long time. I think key to all of this is our ability to measure it properly and to not shy away from measurement and to not shy away from investing in measurement, because the more we measure, the better we measure sponsorship, the less convincing of anybody will have to do as to its role in either marketing communications or across wider business functions. And unfortunately, that's our Achilles heel, not just in sponsorship, by the way, but in advertising, full stop. I mean, I think we're hard on ourselves in sponsorship. We often say that we're really bad at measurement, when in fact, it's an industry problem beyond sponsorship. It's an advertising challenge too. But it is critical to measure properly in order to win over any doubters that may be out there. But to answer your question, sponsorship is absolutely ready. It's ready to deliver and help brands achieve many challenges.
Great. Well, we will be coming back to measurement. Your colleague, Noel Martin, will do the third in this series of webinars. I guess these first two have been all about that 6 hours of sharpening your axe in order to actually make a great statement about what your brand is in relation to how it's choosing to market itself, how it's presenting itself to the world through the assets that a great sponsorship can give to you. It has been a pleasure working with you on these, Jamie, and no doubt we will be coming back again in fairly short order. Sport for Business is there for the whole community. Every morning we produce our daily news digest. Every afternoon we're producing additional content during these challenging times, and this is part of a series of live webinars and leadership interviews that we're creating for the Sport for Business community. It has been a pleasure to actually bring this to you today, a pleasure to work with you, Jamie, and thank you very much to all of you for joining us.